All right, let's go. Number 10. The Halcon. You are 10 years old and your job is to watch. You are not recruited. You are noticed. Sometime in the early 2000s, in the colonias that press up against the edges of Culiacan, the neighborhoods where the streets stop being paved and the address system gives up, a man you already know by sight stops next to you and asks if you want to earn. He doesn't explain what you'll be doing. He doesn't have to. You've already been doing it for free, watching who comes down which street, noting which cars slow down, understanding by instinct which strangers don't belong. The word for what you are now is Halcon, hawk. You are a surveillance node in a human intelligence network that covers more territory than most municipal police forces. Your equipment is a prepaid cell phone and a position. You stand or sit or pretend to play at a fixed point, a corner, a rooftop, a doorway for hours at a stretch. You call a number when something happens. The number changes every few days. You memorize it each time. Dr. Guadalupe Correa Cabrera, a political scientist at George Mason University who has conducted field interviews across Sinaloa State for over a decade, has documented the Halcon network in her research on cartel governance structures. She describes it not as a crime ring, but as a distributed early warning system, one in which the human sensors are disposable and replaceable within hours of removal. You are a sensor. You understand this without being told. What the public received when journalists and NGOs began documenting child recruitment in Sinaloa in the early 2010s was a story about exploitation and poverty, accurate, but incomplete. The government acknowledged the practice in press releases and anti-crime campaign materials. None of those materials describe the operational sophistication of the network you are part of. The version that reached international media was humanitarian in framing. The version that was operationally true was something else. Mexican federal authorities classified Halcon recruitment under existing child labor and criminal association statutes beginning in approximately 2006. Prosecutions were rare, and when they occurred, targeted the children rather than the coordinators above them. Official statements from the Procuraduría General de la República in that period described the phenomenon as a social problem rooted in poverty. The classification did not change the network's function. But the detail that social framing doesn't resolve is this. The Halcon network is not a symptom of cartel operations. It is the nervous system of cartel operations. Remove the Halcones and the organization goes partially blind within the hour. What you are doing at 10 years old, standing on a corner in Culiacan, is providing real-time military-grade situational awareness across an area of operations that spans multiple states and crosses an international border. The network you are a node in covers a corridor of territory roughly the length of the United Kingdom, and it runs, in large part, on children who have not yet started secondary school. Number 9. The barriro. Your body is the container. The recruiter doesn't describe it as what it is. He describes it as a trip, a bus ride, a crossing, a delivery, a return. The item you will carry is never named in conversation. It is described as el paquete or, more often, simply as eso, that thing. By the time you are standing in a bathroom in Nogales or Agua Prieta, swallowing the first of what will be between 80 and 120 latex-wrapped pellets of compressed heroin or methamphetamine, you understand that the language was not evasion but protocol. No one says the word because saying the word creates a record. You are 31 years old. You have a sister in Phoenix who has a job. She did not know you were coming. The pellets are roughly the size of a large grape each. You swallow them with water and then you wait, in a room, in a vehicle, at a border crossing, while your body becomes cargo. Dr. Paul Gutenberg, a historian at the City University of New York who has written extensively on the narcotics trade, has described the barriro or mula system as one of the most durable low-technology solutions in transnational smuggling. Precisely because it is undetectable by the sensing equipment deployed at ports of entry as of the early 2000s and exploits the legal and procedural constraints on body searches, in ways that a package or a vehicle does not. You are undetectable because you are a person. The public understanding of drug mules is shaped almost entirely by high-profile border arrests that reached news broadcasts. Those cases, by definition, are the failures, the people who were caught. The successful crossings produced no footage, no press release, no data point that entered public record. The official numbers on mule arrests at southwest border crossings in any given year represent, by the DEA's own internal estimates cited in declassified portions of its 2010 National Drug Threat Assessment, a fraction of total crossings. What fraction is not specified? The DEA reclassified Barrero operations as a Tier II smuggling vector in its internal threat assessments in the mid-2000s, meaning below the priority threshold of tunnel and vehicle operations. Official public statements in that period emphasized seizures at ports of entry. The reclassification, and the reasoning behind it, was not publicly released for several years. But the one detail that the Tier II classification does not resolve is the mortality risk, not from arrest, but from the cargo itself. A single compromised pellet introduces a lethal dose of narcotics directly into the bloodstream of the person carrying it. The documented mortality events that have occurred in emergency rooms in Tucson, El Paso, and San Diego involved carriers who died before anyone understood what was happening inside them. The total number of undocumented deaths in this category, occurring outside hospital settings, in vehicles or safe houses, is unknown. The corridor you crossed is walked by an estimated several thousand individuals annually, and no institution has a complete count of the ones who did not arrive. Number 8. The soldado. You carry a weapon, and this makes you valuable, and this makes you expendable. You are given the rifle before you are given instructions for it. This is not carelessness. It is sequencing. The rifle establishes the relationship before the words do. You are 19. You grew up in a municipality in the Sierra Madre Occidental where the cartel has been the de facto governing authority since before you were born, collecting informal taxes, mediating disputes, providing security that the state does not. You did not join the Sinaloa Cartel the way a person joins an organization. You entered it the way a person enters a weather system. The rifle is a Kalashnikov pattern weapon. You have seen men carry them your entire life. Holding it feels less like acquiring a tool and more like inheriting one. Your operational function is enforcement and presence. You stand at checkpoints, informal, unannounced, moved weekly, that control road access through mountain territory. You accompany shipments. You respond to incursions from rival groups. Researcher Viridiana Rios, formerly of Harvard's David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies, analyzed the labor economics of cartel soldiering in a study published in 2012 and found that soldado-level operatives are the rank at which mortality risk is highest relative to compensation. The ratio of risk to pay is worse than at any other level of the organization. You are paid per week, not per operation. The amount is enough to rent a room and eat. It is not enough to leave. The public narrative around cartel soldiers was shaped significantly by the narcomanta tradition. The cloth banners left at crime scenes with written messages that positioned killings as internal discipline or responses to betrayal. What reached journalists, and through them the public, was the language the cartel wrote about itself. The official criminal justice record, arrest documents, prosecution filings, documented individual actors and individual acts. The systemic function of the soldado rank, as an organizational layer, was rarely the subject of official public analysis in Mexico during the height of the Calderon security campaign. The Mexican Secretaría de la Defensa Nacional, operating under the Joint Security Strategy beginning in 2007, reclassified low-level cartel operatives from delincuentes organizados to combatientes no estatales in internal doctrine documents, a shift that authorized escalated rules of engagement. This reclassification was not announced in public briefings. Human rights organizations documented the practical consequences of the shift over the following 3 years. In reports that were formally received and largely unacted upon. And yet the detail that the doctrine shift does not resolve is the rate of replacement. For each soldado killed or arrested in the Calderon era, a period during which the Mexican government documented over 47,000 organized crime-related deaths, the organizational slot was filled, typically, within days. The Sierra Madre Range contains dozens of municipalities where the population of military-age men available for recruitment exceeds the cartel's absorption capacity. The soldado who dies is mourned in his neighborhood and replaced by his neighbor. The territory covered by this system of human replenishment runs, north to south, roughly the distance from London to Cairo. Number 7. The Halcon Coordinator. You manage the children who watch. You are not young anymore. You are 26, which in this context is not young. You have survived the soldado years, survived 2 rival incursions, 1 arrest that did not result in a charge, and 1 internal accusation that was resolved by the man above you deciding you were more useful than guilty. Your promotion to coordinator is not announced. It is indicated by a change in who calls you and who you call. You now manage a network of between 12 and 30 Halcones across a defined sector of urban Culiacan, a territory bounded by specific streets that you know precisely and that appear on no official map in the form you know them. Your job is reliability. Every node must be in position. Every call must be answered. The network must not go dark. You spend most of your working hours on a phone that you hold, rarely, to your ear, instead texting in a system of codes that were explained to you once and that you now explain to others. The codes change. The timing of the changes is determined by someone above you whom you have met twice. Dr. Alejandra Flores Martinez, a sociologist at the Universidad Autónoma de Sinaloa, documented middle management operational patterns in a 2018 ethnographic study conducted under conditions of anonymity and institutional risk. She described this tier as the layer most responsible for converting the cartel's territorial claims into lived daily reality, the bureaucratic tissue between the leadership and the street. You are tissue. You hold the network together by being consistently present and consistently credible. The version of cartel structure that entered public knowledge through journalistic accounts and government reports was, necessarily, shaped by what was legible from outside. Leadership figures were named and profiled. Soldados were arrested and counted. The middle management tier, coordinators, sector supervisors, route managers, was largely invisible to outside documentation because it operated through social relationships that produced no physical artifact and left no paper record that differed from ordinary civilian communication. The Mexican Unidad de Inteligencia Financiera, working in coordination with the U.S. Treasury Department's OFAC, began designating mid-level Sinaloa operatives for financial sanctions around 2009. The designations named specific individuals and described their roles in general terms. The operational function of the coordination tier, its relationship to the Halcon network specifically, was not a subject of those public designations. The designations were accurate and incomplete simultaneously. But what the sanctions regime does not resolve is the question of knowledge. You know the names and locations of the children in your network. You know their families. You know which ones are reliable and which ones are frightened. You know what will happen if a node fails to report. This knowledge, specific, relational, human, is not housed in a document or a database. It is housed in you. If you are removed, a successor inherits the network but not the knowledge. The network degrades for weeks or months, then reconstitutes. The cycle has repeated across a system that has been operating in essentially this form for longer than most of your Halcones have been alive. Number 6. The Plaza Boss. You own a city that is not yours. A plaza is a territory, a city, a region, a corridor with economic value. Owning a plaza means collecting from everyone who moves product through it, regardless of affiliation. It means adjudicating disputes between operators below you. It means being the person other people go to when something has gone wrong, which is constantly. You are 38 years old. You have a house in Culiacan in your wife's name, a legitimate business in the construction sector through which money flows in a direction that appears in documents to be the correct direction, and a phone that rings in the middle of the night with calls you cannot ignore. You have not carried a weapon personally in 11 years. The operational function of the plaza boss is taxation and logistics. Every transaction, a drug shipment, a human trafficking operation, a kidnapping for ransom conducted by a smaller group that operates within your territory, generates a payment upward. The percentage is negotiated, in the sense that the party with less leverage negotiates with the party with more leverage. DEA intelligence assessments declassified through FOIA requests in the late 2010s describe the plaza tier as functionally analogous to a regional franchise management structure. The cartel's brand, systems, and supply chain operating through a locally accountable administrator. You are a franchise manager. The franchise covers a geographic area through which billions of dollars of product moves annually, most of it in vehicles you will never see. The public record of plaza bosses exists almost entirely in arrest warrants, indictments in the Southern District of New York or the Eastern District of Virginia, and the occasional news photograph taken at the moment of capture. The image of the arrested boss, kneeling, hands behind his back, surrounded by military or federal police, is the image that entered public consciousness. What preceded the arrest by years or decades? The governance, the taxation, the dispute resolution, the institutional knowledge, none of that is visible in the arrest photograph. Mexican federal prosecutors handling organized crime cases under the ley federal contra, la delincuencia organizada, typically charged plaza bosses with specific predicate offenses, drug trafficking, weapons possession, homicide in some cases, rather than with the administrative functions of territorial governance. The governance functions were legally difficult to charge. Official press releases emphasized the seizure of assets and the disruption of supply chains. The territory itself was typically administered by a successor within weeks of an arrest. And yet the prosecution record does not resolve the question of what a plaza actually is. It is not a business. It is not simply a criminal enterprise. It is a governing institution, collecting revenue, providing security, enforcing contracts, regulating commerce in territories where the state has not successfully performed those functions for generations. The municipality of Badiraguato, Sinaloa, which is the birthplace of Joaquin Guzman and several other significant Sinaloa figures, has a population of roughly 40,000 people and has been formally governed, in practice, by cartel administrative structures for a period that Mexican historians who study the region place at somewhere between 30 and 60 years. That is longer than most current members of the Mexican Senate have been in government. Number 5. The financiero. The money is the most dangerous thing you touch. You have an accounting degree from a private university in Guadalajara. You speak English without an accent in the financial register, the language of wire transfers, investment vehicles, shell company structures, and correspondent banking relationships. You were recruited not on a street corner but at a meeting in a restaurant by a man who was introduced to you as a business contact and who explained the work over a meal that lasted 2 hours and ended with a number that you could not refuse, and more precisely, with the clear understanding that refusal was not operationally available to you. You are 44 years old. You have not committed a violent act in your life, and you never will. You are the reason the violence has an economic result. Your function is conversion, transforming cash that exists in physical form, in amounts that would be conspicuous in the banking system, into assets that can be held, transferred, and eventually reintegrated into the formal economy. This involves layering, multiple transactions across multiple jurisdictions, each one individually below reporting thresholds, collectively composing a flow that moves hundreds of millions of dollars annually. FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, published a series of analyses between 2010 and 2018, portions of which were released publicly, describing Sinaloa financial architecture as among the most sophisticated of any transnational criminal organization. The analysts who wrote those reports described encountering structures that took teams of investigators months to map. You could draw them in 20 minutes on a napkin. The public account of cartel money laundering, as it reached mainstream media, was built largely from high-profile prosecutions. The HSBC settlement in 2012, the various forfeitures and designations issued against specific individuals. Those cases were accurate in their particulars and represented the cases that were buildable from available evidence. They were not representative of the total volume or the full sophistication of the operations that produced them. The version of cartel finance that reached public discussion was the version that had already failed from the cartel's perspective. The U.S. Department of Justice's Money Laundering and Asset Recovery Section, in coordination with DEA and IRS criminal investigation, pursued financiero-level targets through a combination of Title III intercepts, financial record subpoenas, and cooperative witnesses. Indictments in this tier were rarer than in operational tiers and took significantly longer to build 5 to 8 years from initial predication to unsealing in documented cases. Several significant prosecutions were sealed for years before the defendants were located. The timeline of investigation in this tier outlasts most political administrations. But the detail the prosecution timeline does not resolve is the ratio of seized to total assets. The Congressional Research Service, in a 2017 report on cartel finances, cited estimates suggesting that law enforcement seizures represent somewhere between 2 and 5% of total cartel revenue in any given year. The rest enters the formal economy, purchases real estate, funds legitimate businesses, pays school fees, buys cars, and sits in accounts that pass compliance review. The money you have moved in your career, totaled, is enough to fund the entire annual operating budget of a mid-sized Latin American nation. Most of it is no longer distinguishable from the economy it entered. Number 4. The Sicario. Killing is the least interesting thing you do. The title is wrong, or at least incomplete. What you are is a precision instrument, a specialist deployed at moments when a problem has reached the stage where it can only be resolved in one direction. You are not a soldado. You do not stand at checkpoints or accompany shipments. You are contacted when a decision has already been made above you, when the only remaining question is execution. You are 33 years old. You trained in the early part of your career in a structure that former members and military prosecutors have described as resembling a paramilitary training program, physical conditioning, weapons handling, surveillance and counter-surveillance, driving, and the management of what the trainers called the moment, the period between decision and action during which most men fail. You did not fail. Your operational profile, as reconstructed from the testimony of former associates in sealed court proceedings, involves extensive pre-operation surveillance, sometimes running for weeks. You identify patterns of movement, points of vulnerability, the specific window in a subject's routine that is consistent and therefore exploitable. Dr. Robert Bunker, a senior fellow at the U.S. Army War College's Strategic Studies Institute, has written about the professionalization of cartel enforcement at this tier, noting in a 2014 analysis that the operational methodology of elite Sicario units in Sinaloa bore closer resemblance to state intelligence operations than to conventional organized crime enforcement. You conduct reconnaissance the way a special operations unit would. The difference is your legal standing. The public record of Sicario operations consists almost entirely of aftermath, the photographs of crime scenes that appeared in Mexican newspapers, The terse police reports that documented a body, a vehicle, a location, a time of death. The operational process, the weeks of preparation, the logistical coordination, the communication protocols left no document in public view. Investigative journalists who attempted to reconstruct specific operations from the outside, including reporters at Reforma and El Universal, produced partial accounts that were accurate in their narrative outlines and necessarily incomplete in their operational detail. Mexican federal prosecutors pursuing Sicario-level defendants typically relied on cooperative witness testimony from cartel members who had negotiated plea arrangements. The testimony was specific to individual operations. Broader organizational context, command authority, payment structures, target selection criteria, was documented in some cases and sealed in others. Several significant prosecutions in this tier involved defendants simultaneously facing charges in U.S. federal courts, creating jurisdictional negotiations that extended case timelines by years. And yet the witness testimony does not resolve the question of scale. The Mexican government's official homicide statistics for the period from 2006 to 2020, as compiled by the Sistema Nacional de Seguridad Pública, documented approximately 350,000 homicides in total, with organized crime assessed as a factor in a significant portion of them. The subset attributable to Sinaloa operations specifically is not publicly broken out with precision, but the specialist tier that you occupy, the people who conduct planned, intelligence-supported operations rather than reactive violence, is estimated by academic researchers studying the field to number in the hundreds, not the thousands. A few hundred people, operating across a country of 130 million, with a body of work that has altered the demographic composition of entire regions of northern Mexico. Number 3, the regional operator. You are 3 people and only one of them is real. You have a legitimate identity that is documented, consistent, and well-maintained. The man in the records, the one who holds the deed on 2 properties, who pays taxes through a services company, who has a documented travel history that includes business trips to Miami, Houston, and Madrid, is real in every verifiable sense. He has a tailor. He plays golf with people who work in local government. He attends charity events. He is not a fiction. He is a construction, an identity assembled over years with the deliberate intention of being exactly the kind of person whose accounts pass compliance review and whose name does not produce results in law enforcement databases. The second version of you is operational, the one who manages relationships between plaza bosses, resolves territorial conflicts before they become costly, and coordinates supply chain logistics across a region that includes multiple international border crossings. The third version of you is the one that exists in DEA files, described by an informant's account, partially identified, referred to by a code name. That version has been under investigation for 7 years. The operational tier you occupy sits between the plaza bosses, who manage territory, and the senior leadership, who set strategic direction. You manage relationships between operators, between the cartel and the political and business figures whose cooperation sustains the enterprise, between the Mexican operation and its distribution partners in the United States, Europe, and Asia. Researcher Viridiana Rios, in her modeling of Sinaloa organizational structure published in the Journal of Conflict Resolution, described this tier as the cartel's diplomatic core, the layer that maintains alliances, negotiates terms, and prevents the kind of internal fragmentation that has destroyed rival organizations. You do not command violence. You prevent it, because violence is expensive and your job is efficiency. The public record of your tier is the thinnest of any layer in the organization. The jefes above you have been named, profiled, photographed, indicted in absentia. The soldados below you have been arrested and charged in numbers. The middle layer, the regional managers, the logistics coordinators, the political liaison figures, appears in public documentation primarily as a reference class in indictments against other people. You are the unnamed intermediary in a wire intercept transcript. You are the person whose account received a transfer that a financiero was charged for sending. OFAC designations targeting Sinaloa associates in the period from 2012 to 2020 included a small number of figures at your tier, identified through financial intelligence, cooperative witnesses, and in several cases, information sharing with Mexican intelligence services, whose own reliability was itself a subject of internal U.S. government assessment. The designations froze assets and imposed secondary sanctions on financial institutions that processed transactions for designated individuals. The practical effect on cartel operations, as assessed in internal DEA reporting later summarized in oversight hearings, was described as disruptive but not degrading. But the detail that the designation process does not resolve is the depth of integration. You have relationships, some financial, some social, some both, with individuals in the banking sector, the construction sector, municipal government, and state-level law enforcement in at least 3 Mexican states. Those relationships are not structured as bribery or coercion in a simple sense. They are long-term social arrangements built over years that produce mutual benefit and mutual risk. They do not appear in a wire intercept unless someone says something incautious. The people involved in those relationships are, in most cases, not criminals in any prosecutable sense. They are people who know you, and who have over time made a series of small decisions that have made them useful to you. The network of those relationships spans a geography and implicates a number of people in ordinary professional positions that no official investigation has yet fully mapped. Number 2, the trusted lieutenant. Loyalty is structural, not personal. You have known Joaquin Guzman Loera, or his equivalent at the summit of the organization you serve, for long enough that the relationship no longer requires explicit maintenance. Trust at this level is not emotional. It is historical. It is mutual exposure. It is the accumulated weight of shared decisions that could destroy both of you equally. You are the person who knows things. Not operational details. Those are managed by people below you, but the true things, the real ownership of assets, the real names behind the shell structures, the real relationships with the political figures whose cooperation is foundational to the enterprise's survival. You are the keeper of the institutional memory of an organization that deliberately avoids writing things down. Your daily function is more executive than operational. You assess threats, not physical threats but strategic ones. A rival organization's expansion into a corridor. A shift in law enforcement priorities following a political change. A lieutenant whose behavior pattern has begun to suggest that he is talking to someone he should not be talking to. You brief upward and you decide downward. The men who carry weapons in your organization will never meet you. They know a version of you that exists as a name, or a title, or a story told by someone who saw you once, years ago, in a context that was not operational. Former DEA Special Agent Michael Vigil, who ran the agency's international operations before retiring and writing publicly about Sinaloa organizational dynamics, described the trusted lieutenant tier as the most consequential and least documented layer in transnational cartel structure. Vigil noted that the removal of individual leaders had, historically, been far less damaging to Sinaloa than the removal of the same role in less institutionally developed organizations, precisely because lieutenants at this level carry organizational knowledge that leadership alone does not. The public narrative of cartel structure is organized around individual personalities, the capo, the kingpin, the named face on an extradition document. That narrative is accurate and it obscures. The accurate part is that specific individuals at the leadership tier make consequential decisions. The obscuring part is the implication that the organization is coextensive with its leaders, that removing the leader removes the institution. The public narrative, built from prosecutorial press releases and journalistic profiles, consistently underweighted the depth and resilience of the tier you occupy. U.S. federal prosecutors pursuing Sinaloa cases through the Eastern District of New York, the office that brought Guzman Loera to trial in 2018 and 2019, built their case substantially on the testimony of cooperative witnesses who occupied the lieutenant tier and below. The testimony was detailed, internally consistent, and sufficient to convict. It was also, necessarily, the account of people who had agreed to cooperate, a selection that represented a fraction of the lieutenant class, and that, by definition, excluded the members of that class who did not cooperate. The picture assembled from cooperative witnesses is the picture of the parts of the organization that failed. But the Guzman trial and every conviction before and after it does not resolve the continuity question. When the Chapo was extradited, when the verdict was read, when the sentence was imposed, you, or the person whose role you occupy, continued working. The organization did not pause. Shipments moved. Revenue was collected. Disputes were adjudicated. Successors had been identified and positioned years before the arrest. In an organization that treats leadership transition the way a government treats it, as an institutional process, not an emergency. The Sinaloa Cartel has outlasted every Mexican presidential administration since its founding. It has outlasted every DEA administrator who has prioritized its disruption. The length of its institutional continuity now exceeds that of several of the nation states whose laws it violates. Number 1. El Señor. The organization does not end where you end. You are not a person, in the operational sense that matters here. You are a position, and that position has been occupied by different individuals over a span of time that now exceeds 4 decades. At the apex of the Sinaloa Cartel, the thing that persists is not a man but a structure, a set of relationships, a set of obligations, a set of institutional arrangements that predate and will outlast any individual who sits at its center. The man who occupied this position most publicly, Joaquin Archivaldo Guzman Loera, El Chapo, born in La Tuna, Badiraguato, Sinaloa on April 4, 1957, was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 30 years in a federal court in Brooklyn on July 17, 2019. He is serving that sentence at ADX Florence in Colorado, the facility known as the Supermax, in conditions of near-total isolation from the outside world. He entered the facility, and the organization continued. The cartel that Guzman and his early associates built from the logistics networks of the Guadalajara cartel in the late 1980s was, by the time of his final arrest in 2016, the most geographically distributed drug trafficking organization ever documented by U.S. federal law enforcement. DEA's 2020 National Drug Threat Assessment described Sinaloa as maintaining a presence in all 50 U.S. states, in more than 50 countries, and as accounting for the largest share of the illicit drug supply in the United States. The organization that produces this outcome has no headquarters, no single point of failure, and no org chart that any authority has ever seen in its entirety. What exists in law enforcement documentation is a series of partial maps, each one accurate to the moment it was drawn and obsolete by the time it was analyzed. The public account of El Señor, of the Chapo tier, is the most elaborated in media and prosecutorial records, and simultaneously the most misleading in terms of organizational function. The trial of Guzman Loera produced a record that ran to thousands of pages of testimony, years of wire intercept transcripts, and the accounts of 56 witnesses. It named names, documented operations, and constructed a narrative of the organization through the testimony of people who had functioned within it. That narrative was accurate. It was also the account of a single defendant and a bounded period of time. The organization it described continued operating before, during, and after the trial. The U.S. Treasury's 2021 and 2022 OFAC designations of Sinaloa-affiliated figures named individuals associated with the network of Guzman Loera's sons. the faction known as Los Chapitos, along with figures associated with Ismael Zambada Garcia, El Mayo, who remained at large and is assessed by U.S. authorities to be the longest continuously operating major cartel figure in North American history. Zambada's operational longevity, running to approximately 4 decades of documented activity at senior levels, is without parallel in the literature on transnational organized crime. He has been indicted. He has never been extradited. He has never been successfully prosecuted. The designations targeting his network describe an organization whose succession planning has apparently been functional for longer than most law enforcement careers. But what no designation, no indictment, and no conviction resolves is the foundational question of what this organization actually is. It is not, at its root, a drug trafficking enterprise in the way a corporation is a business. It is a governance structure, one that fills the institutional space left by the chronic failure of the Mexican state to project authority, provide security, or deliver economic opportunity across the rural highland zones where the cartel originated and still draws its human capital. The Halcón at number 10 and El Señor at number 1 are not simply the bottom and top of a criminal hierarchy. They are the endpoints of a social institution that has replicated itself across generations, that has proven more durable than the governments attempting to dismantle it, and that operates in the daily lives of millions of people in ways that no arrest photograph, no sentencing hearing, and no press release has yet fully accounted for. The organization is not a person. It is not a structure. It is the answer that a specific society produced to a specific set of conditions, and those conditions have not changed. Every rank in this system is a life that someone is living right now. That fact is not an abstraction. It has a geography, a payroll, and a body count that has been accumulating for longer than most people watching this video have been alive. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.